Thank you, Mr. President, and all of you for convening here today on this important matter. When President Trump took office, he made it among his highest priorities the restoration of peace anywhere and everywhere in the world where the opportunity presented itself. And it's met with great success in a number of places. We had a conflict between India and Pakistan, which was a very dangerous conflict, and one that he chose to engage in and was able to bring it to, be very involved in bringing it to a cessation of hostilities. When Thailand and Cambodia were engaged in hostilities, the president got involved over a weekend over in the United States, and were able to play a critical role in that regard as well. We are very grateful to some of the countries in this room that were helpful in that regard with the DRC and Rwanda, and work remains to be done. But again, a conflict that presents grave dangers and extraordinary humanitarian challenges. With Azerbaijan and Armenia as well. He has become involved, and we were able to sign an agreement at the White House very recently that hopefully prevents a future conflict which would prove costly and deadly. But the one that's proved to be an extraordinary challenge has been the war in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine. The President has worked on it tirelessly, has invested a tremendous amount of his own time, energy, and the highest levels of our government. We have had meetings in Turkey, meetings in Saudi Arabia, meetings in Alaska, countless phone calls, doing everything possible to bring this conflict to a resolution and to an end. A war that cannot end militarily. It will end at a negotiating table. That's where this war will end. But the longer it lasts, the more people will die, the more will be destroyed. Some of the numbers we are seeing in the loss of life among military personnel, for example, on the Russian Federation side, are staggering. Staggering. In 1 month alone, more loss of life than in the entirety of the U.S. engagement in Afghanistan or Iraq. This war has to end, and we have done everything we possibly can and will continue to do everything we possibly can to bring it to an end. Very generous offers have been made. For example, a ceasefire at the current lines of contact, while all the other details on the future of the conflict could be worked out in terms of future territorial lines. The President has shown extraordinary patience in terms of not assessing additional sanctions in the hopes of having a breakthrough in this regard. And all has come to what appears to be not just a stagnant one, but an era, and we've entered a period of what appears to be potential even escalation, with the historically highest number of strikes we've seen over the last few nights and before. And now we are also watching incursions into neighboring airspace by both drones and airplanes. The President is a very patient man. He's very committed to peace, but his patience is not infinite. And as he has said repeatedly, he has before him the opportunity and the options of imposing additional economic costs on the Russian Federation if necessary in order to bring this to an end. He also has before him the option, as he has already chosen to do in some circumstances, to sell defensive weaponry and potentially offensive weaponry so that Ukraine can defend itself from this assault by purchasing that weaponry. So I'm here to say to the Security Council, the United States remains as committed as it has ever been to a peaceful resolution to this dangerous conflict. But there will come a moment in which we will have to conclude that perhaps there is no interest in a peaceful resolution. And then the President has before him real options, which he intends to pursue, as he has made clear today in some of the messages he has put out. So I strongly urge the Security Council, the member states here, and those who are not part of this as well, to do everything in their power, and including the Russian Federation, to do everything within their power, and the Ukrainian side for that matter as well, but all sides, to bring this war to an end before it becomes something that will last another 3 or 4 years, lead to more destruction, both economic and at the same time a loss of life and loss of property and loss of futures. This war needs to end. But if it does not, if there is no path to peace in the short term, then the United States and President Donald J. Trump will take the steps necessary to impose costs for continued aggression.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary General, distinguished leaders, representatives of states and governments, and all those who still pay attention to the work of the United Nations. We must admit the world's attention to the UN is fading. The organization has less influence, and too often there is a lack of real decisions on fundamental issues. This is exactly what we need to speak about today, about the tools that sadly are not working now. But they will work, I'm sure. They will work if you are active if we are active, because the main tool is in your hands. First of all, I thank the Republic of Korea for this meeting of the Security Council and for the opportunity to call for peace. Today, there will be a clear call for peace in this Council. And here is one of the main distortions of our time. Whom must we call to peace, and on whom must we press to achieve it? One of the permanent members of this Council is doing everything to prolong the largest war in Europe since World War II. Russia does this with impunity, using its veto power, buying influence, and keeping peace on hold. The Russian representatives is here, but of course not the one who makes the real decisions. That man fears to sit face to face with Ukraine and the world and openly admit he wants only war. Instead, Putin sends delegates who cannot and don't want to stop the bloodshed. And when he appears abroad in Beijing or somewhere else, it's only to buy more time for killing, pretending he seeks diplomacy. Putin only cares about using every meeting, every chance to keep the war going. Each day Russia kills our people, destroys our cities, and leaves no sign it will ever return to the principles of the UN Charter. China is also represented here, a powerful nation on which Russia now depends completely. If China truly wanted this war to stop, it could compel Moscow to end the invasion. Without China, Putin's Russia is nothing. Yet too often, China stays silent and distant instead of active for peace. The United States of America is present here as well, a strong nation that supports our defense, and we've said yes to every proposal from the US president for a ceasefire and talks with Russia to bring peace. But Russia always says no, or tries to confuse everyone so that even a ceasefire can't happen. And I met with President Trump just now, and we spoke about how to finally bring peace, and we discussed a few good ideas, and I hope they will work. And I'm grateful for this meeting, and we expect America's actions to push Russia toward peace. Moscow fears America and always pays attention to it. The United Kingdom is here, a permanent member of the Security Council. France is here, also a permanent member. Both nations support us, support our people, our independence. Both promote diplomacy, and both are parties to a document that was supposed to be a positive milestone, together with the other permanent members of the UN Security Council. But instead, it became a warning to the world. The Budapest Memorandum, meant to guarantee Ukraine's security in exchange for giving up nuclear weapons, failed. It proved that international promises can turn into blabbering. That is why today, with Britain, with France, and already with more than 30 nations in our coalition of willings, we are building a new security architecture. We count on the United States of America as a backstop. Real security guarantees must become the line Russia cannot cross again. Here is one example of how strength can stop war. If we could strengthen our skills with a joint system to shut down skies, with a short system to shut down Russian missiles and drones, it would force Russia to stop its attack from the sky, because everything could be shut down, and so Putin would be forced to sit here or in another respectable venue and look for a truce on the ground. If there is no war in the sky, Russia can't keep fighting on the ground. I have talked about this with President Trump and with other leaders. Why do I say this now and here? Because you, the United States, China, Britain, France, the permanent members of the Security Council, represent the world's essential power, the power that must act when international law alone cannot. And no, not Russia. With this war, Russia has discredited itself, even for those who do not yet criticize Putin openly. They still feel that Russia's presence brings no good. Excellencies, behind every international institution, there must be real strength to enforce decisions. This is true for the Security Council and for the UN as a whole. If you stand together for ending this war, even Russia will have to obey. And if some of you act while others delay, the war goes on. Ukraine wants peace more than anyone in the world. The front is on our land, and we mourn our people, and we try to save our cities and to save our small villages. Russia ignores its dead, blind to its own losses. But one day, it will see and it will hear, and it will happen when it sees your actions, when it hears your united call for peace. That is my appeal to you today. Be the force that act together, please, united lest to stop Russia's war. And we know how to guarantee security. What we need now is a strong push to force Russia toward peace. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
President, I thank Secretary General Guterres for his briefing. Allow me to make 4 points. First, dialogue and negotiations remain the fundamental path forward. Recently, positive momentum has emerged in the dialogue and negotiations on the Ukraine crisis, with key parties holding a series of engagements and talks. However, significant differences remain in their positions and demands. The parties to the conflict should intensify their efforts, demonstrate political will, show flexibility, and take seriously and address properly each other's legitimate security concerns, so as to reach a comprehensive, lasting, and binding peace agreement at an early date. Second, promoting de-escalation is a pressing priority. At present, there are no signs of a halt to hostilities on the ground. The parties to the conflict continue to carry out large-scale drone and missile attacks, and substantial quantities of arms and ammunition continue to flow into the battlefield. China has consistently called for adherence to the 3 principles of no expansion of the battlefield, no escalation of the fighting, and no fanning up the flame by any party. We hope all parties will play a constructive role in de-escalating the situation and in creating the necessary conditions for a ceasefire and the cessation of hostilities at an early date. Third, alleviating the humanitarian crisis is a moral imperative. Civilians are the greatest victims of war. Each additional day of conflict brings an additional day of suffering to the people. The parties to the conflict should exercise restraint, strictly abide by international humanitarian law, and refrain under all circumstances from attacking civilians and civilian infrastructure, and avoid the use of WMDs. The international community should step up its humanitarian assistance efforts in order to help those affected by the crisis overcome their difficulties. Fourth, containing the spillover effects of the crisis is a shared responsibility. The crisis has taken a big toll on global economic development, with developing countries bearing the brunt. The international community should strengthen cooperation on issues such as food, energy, finance, trade, and the protection of critical infrastructure in order to jointly maintain the stability and smooth functioning of global supply chains. Abusing unilateral sanctions and long-arm jurisdiction under the pretext of the crisis does not contribute to a political settlement. On the contrary, it creates new problems and should therefore be rejected. President, since the first day of the crisis, China has been upholding an objective and impartial position, calling for a ceasefire and cessation of hostilities, and advocating for peace talks towards a political settlement. Guided by the four shoulds put forth by President Xi Jinping, we have maintained close communication with parties concerned, sent our special envoys for shadow diplomacy, and together with Brazil and other countries of the Global South, initiated the Group of Friends for Peace in order to consolidate calls for peace, promote consensus on peace, and advance peace efforts. China stands ready to work with the international community and continue our constructive role for the early political settlement of the crisis.